Hi, Panda here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the Super Nintendo. The Super Nintendo arrived in the early 90s and was Nintendo's attempt at the 16-bit era, which they successfully did. What Nintendo did here was bring us so many different art styles and graphics, even some early 3D games. So I'm going to discuss in this video and show off and talk a little bit about the different graphical styles and how they were done and how they're made, and which styles I like and what's aged well and what hasn't aged as well. So this is an overall discussion of all things Super Nintendo. So let's have a look. First up we have sprites. So the Super Nintendo, being a more powerful console than the previous Nintendo, added the ability for more detailed sprites, and Super Mario World is a good example of this. You can see many motion in Mario himself, there's more frames to the animation, and just overall more detail in the environment and the backdrops. So those who don't know, sprites, basically you have a image, say, of Mario standing, and then there'll be a series of other images with slight variations of where his foot might be or his hat might be, and when you stick these in order, these frames, then you get that nice smooth animation of him running or using his cape. So this is like the basic work of sprites, and this is like the most basic form of graphics, but that sounds harsh because obviously there's a lot of complexity that goes into making it. But this is what I call the bread and butter of most SNES games using this sprite work. But as we'll see from some of the other games I'm going to show off here, they started to use some other technologies to implement to add a little bit more to like the background or how things work to even early 3D games. Super Mario World also pulled off some different tricks as well. As you can see from many of the ghost house levels, some of the ghosts are more transparent and that opacity isn't as high. That way you can get this sort of eerie, spooky look, and then you can see more through the ghosts and see the environment behind them. Now, even 2D games on the SNES expanded its appearance and how they look, not just in different styles, which we'll see a bit later on, but technology on how they made the sprites. And the big example that many people will know is Donkey Kong Country. What Rare did here was use pre-rendered 3D models and then turn them into sprites. So they converted these 3D models into sprites to use in the gameplay to give them more of this like 3D. They kind of have a little bit like a stop animation look to it. Some other games that use this technology really laid into the stop animation look, like Clay Fighters. Here they just kind of look like, oh, you can tell they were 3D models made to be 2D sprites. It's got definitely a unique look. It had been previously used, but this is really the main game that put this 3D pre-rendered sprites look on the map. This also inspired many other games, like I said, Clay Fighter, Killer Instinct. It definitely gave the characters more of a 3D look and some things in the environment, and it definitely gave it a unique look. Now, my main criticism of this, I don't think it's aged particularly well, and when you're playing Donkey Kong Country, it is hard to tell where like some of the platforms are and where you're standing and where you're going to fall off. Makes for some tricky sections. I'd say the only other criticism I have as well, sometimes characters and the background, the environment don't quite sit well together and they look a little bit janky, as they would say, but this is minor criticism over decades this game's been out. Obviously when this first came out in the 90s, this was mind-blowing. Even my nostalgic remember going, man, Donkey Kong Country looks really cool and it's got a unique look. So yeah, turning these 3D models into sprites also meant you had the 3D model, you kind of just adjust their movements a little bit and then turn it into a series of sprites to give it that nice smooth animation look. But the SNES wasn't going to stop there for 3D, it went even further, and we're going to talk about that now in something called the Super FX chip. The Super FX chip redefined what games could look like on the Super Nintendo and what the Super Nintendo was capable of. So this was a chip that was added into the game cartridge itself. It was a coprocessor on the graphics support unit, the GSU, which gave the ability to do 3D polygon models. It was designed by Argonaut Games, it had polygon rendering capabilities, but the cost of the chip did lead to the games on these cartridges being more expensive, so you didn't see too many games in here. They did Star Fox, a racing game, and they even developed the chip further into a second chip which they used in Yoshi's Island, which we'll show some as well. But this gave pure polygon 3D environments and games, as you can see in Star Fox or Starwing, depends on where you are from. This showed that you could make 3D models that you could control, move about, enemies that were 3D, and Star Fox really showed this off moving about, and even the ability to like destroy enemies, explosions, the ability to fly. Now the downside from this early polygon technology, and as you might can tell from the gameplay of Star Fox, when you go back and play it, and when you're looking at it, let's be honest, the frame rate is awful. This is not a smooth experience. But this game still holds up in a way because there's something special about it and I really enjoy playing through it. But the frame rate is awful. It's really bad. And a few other games that went for the 3D polygon model suffered the same fate as well with this poor frame rate. Now when they moved on and did it in Yoshi's Island using the second chip, they basically were using it to enhance 2D effects and give some other objects 3D effects, and you don't really see the frame rate issue as much in Yoshi's Island, so they kind of managed it and got the hang of it. I think they just used it in small doses, whilst Starwing went full on 3D polygon models for everything. So yeah, there's ups and downs to it, but I think it's an important part of the Super Nintendo history and definitely had a unique graphical look compared to most sprite-based games. Another SNES game with a unique graphical look was F-Zero. This used a technique called Mode 7, where the background could move independently and separate from other objects. The environment rotated around the center point, and F-Zero really shows this because you're racing, and I think without this Mode 7 it probably wouldn't be possible, because F-Zero was a racing game that was definitely more traditional, like behind the vehicle and you raced around the track when you turned, and there were moments where the vehicle spun round. It definitely was more engaging, and also it was very different from racing games to that point where they were more shown as isometric or top-down races. Other graphical interesting things in F-Zero is the fact that like on the menu it has like the vehicle can rotate all the way around. There was a lot of scaling as well, so when you get near to another racer they seemed closer and bigger, or when you go away they shrunk, or when you did jumps. So a lot of that gave it more of an impact of a 3D look. Also, this is interesting, using Mode 7 meant you could do 3D style effects without using polygons. This was still all sprite based. Mode 7 did appear in many other SNES games as well, including Castlevania 4 that used it mainly for the backgrounds effects. So there you go, that's just a selection of a few different graphical styles that the SNES pulled off, some of the different techniques from Super FX chip to Mode 7 to using 3D models to make pre-rendered sprites, and I think the SNES had a really quite diverse art style and graphical style, considering it was just what people thought was an upgrade to a console that just did 2D games. It really proved that there was a lot more you could do with that machine before the world entered mainly 3D games. When the Saturn and PlayStation 1 and Nintendo 64 developed, we kind of forgotten about 2D games and what they did, but that's why I'm having a reminisce here and thinking about all the different styles that the SNES did, and the SNES will probably still be one of my favourite consoles of all time. So thank you for joining me today on this interesting look at SNES graphics. Thank you to our patrons and Twitch subscribers who help support the channel, and you can find out more in the links below. Remember to like and subscribe, and have a good day, and we'll see you next time. Bye!